Welcome to CEDAR Podcast. Common European Data Spaces and Robust AI for Transparent Public Governance.
So hello and welcome back everybody to the CEDAR podcast series. Today we're going again to spend some time together for the second episode. You might remember we started 1 month ago, more or less, and we opened this journey by tackling the legal and ethics sides of the project. But we would like today to move to another important discussion and to explore a bit more challenging territories. With the support of my guest today, we are going to explore a bit deeper the actual role of transparency when it comes to public trust and in a public administration sphere, and why corruption patterns are so complicated and challenging to identify and measure, and hopefully to provide a meaningful overview of the connection between a political and cultural background and corruption. And finally, of course, we will try to contextualize all of this and within the CEDAR project framework and how the project is moving around all of these subjects. So without further ado, let me to say hello, first of all, and give the floor to our three guests today before diving deep into the conversation of today. And of course, it's needless to say, all of our three guests today are CEDAR valuable CEDAR partners. We have Peter Gref, professor at Kiel University at the Institute for Social Sciences and Sociology. Tim Stucktai, Executive Director at the Brandenburgisches Institute for Society and Security, and Sönke Hase, Scientific Assistant at Kiel University. But I would like to give for 20-30 seconds the floor to all of you to better and properly introduce yourself. So the floor is yours as the first one, Peter, and very nice to have you all here.
Thank you, Francesco. Yes, I'm a professor at Kiel University, and my topic is empirical social research, and my research focuses mainly on empirical methods and statistics, as well as corruption, social capital, and the study of deviance.
Thank you very much, Peter. Again, very pleased to have you here. And let's introduce yourself. Tim, the floor is yours.
Sure, of course. So Tim Stucktai, I'm a professor for the economics of cybersecurity at the German University of Digital Science and the executive director at BICS, the Brandenburg Institute for Society and Security. So I'm an economist by training, and at BICS, we are trying to use economic tools from economics and apply them to security issues. And this is also what brought us into the CEDAR project.
Thank you very much, Tim, for the very overarching introduction. And now it's time for you, Sönke, to introduce yourself. Good to have you here as well.
Yes, very, very great to be here. I'm a researcher at Kiel University doing my PhD on corruption, specifically using machine learning methods to detect corruption, preferably in big data sets, which will be a topic later.
Great. Fantastic. I think we can directly move on. There's no need to linger, and I'd like to let's say kick off the conversation with a so-called ice-breaking question. I think this might sound maybe to the three of you, to some of our audience, a bit naive, let's say, or at least a huge subject to tackle at a first glance. But I think it's a good way to give it a go and to kick in the conversation. So I'm looking mainly at you, Tim, to get this started. I'd like to ask you as a first to you, and then to open the floor to the other guests. And what is so bad about, generally speaking, about corruption and a lack of transparency when it comes to public trust, economic development, and resource wastes?
Sure. And I don't think it's a naive question at all, because let's face it, on an individual level, sometimes it feels like, hey, that's a rational thing to be corrupt or to bribe someone, to speed up a bureaucratic process, to deal with rigid regulations or inefficient public administration. So in order to get around these time-consuming procedures and complex paperworks or unpredictable delays, come on, 50 euros here and there, and things are becoming more predictable. Or as we say in economics, you reduce the transaction costs. So from that aspect, hey, so what's so bad about corruption? But unfortunately, or on a national level or for society at large, it does have some very severe and negative consequences. And that has to do a lot with the misallocation and the inefficiencies that are produced because of corruption and intransparency. So, for example, for a public official, the incentive is there to, if you accept bribes, then the incentive is there to shift more work towards the part in which you can make some extra money, instead of allocating resources to where they are used best. Corruption and intransparency also reduces investments and ultimately economic growth, because, well, from empirical research, we know that corruption deters both domestic, but more importantly, foreign investment. It reduces the efficiency of public spending, because again, you rather spend in places where you can make some extra money as a bureaucrat. And it lowers overall economic growth, because basically the profitability of investments in research and development or in your own education, increasing your human capital, are becoming less profitable. So all in all, the state becomes more dysfunctional, maybe even to a point when it becomes a culture to bribe and a culture to be corrupt, where it can even endanger the stability of the state and might even lead to, or empirically does lead to, violent conflict.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very illuminating, Tim. I think that the word dysfunctional is very, at least to me, sounds very related to the concept of corruption. But I'd like to ask also to either Peter or 𝐮𝐿𝐼 if they want to add on something on this.
Yes, Tim has given a great summary of the empirical research. And from the perspective of a social scientist, I would like to add that it's not only dysfunctional at the government state, it's also becoming dysfunctional at the level of the people, at the citizens. And it's a trust issue, which counts the most here. Maybe we will hear about that later on.
Okay. Thank you very much, Peter. And so maybe we can now sliding a bit to, let's say, one of the core themes, core subject of the project, of the CEDAR project, one of the primary reasons why we are here, and into more technical details and technicalities. We might start tackling the open data and data spaces in public procurement topic. And I'd like to turn to 𝐮𝐿𝐼 now. I'd like to ask you, can you define what is open data in public procurement and why it is so important for understanding potential corruption? And also tell us later a bit more on the biggest challenges when it comes to using procurement data from different sources. Floor is yours, 𝐮𝐿𝐼.
Yes, so when we talk about open data in public procurement, what we mean is basically information about how governments spend public money. So information on contracts, tenders, bids, suppliers, all that is published online in a format people can actually use. So not buried in PDFs or scanned documents, but actually clean data, structured, that can be searched, analyzed, and also reused. That would be the ideal case. That's the technical side. Let me make it a bit more tangible. So imagine your local city wants to build a new town hall, just for example. They have to put out a public call for bids saying, here's what we need, here's a budget, please send us your offers. That then gets posted on the European platform, Tenders Electronic Daily, or TED for short. Contractors submit their bids, the city evaluates them, and then awards the contract to the winner. The best part about this, all of this, all the information about who won, how much are they getting paid, even if there were changes later on, all this information is published online for anyone to see. And that's not a one-off. There are about 1,000 of these contract notices posted every single day on the TED platform, and they add up to about 800 billion euros in spending every year. And TED isn't even the only place where such data is published. Many countries have own national procurement platforms. Some cover more smaller purchases that don't get listed on TED and might include more local details, more granular data, even more detailed data that isn't available for TED because of EU laws, but might be covered by national laws. And then at this big overall structure, there are platforms like Open Tender who try to pull all this data together in one single data set in one place to make it available for everyone to use. So if this data exists, why does it matter? What is it good for? The original idea I found behind publishing this data was about fairness and competition. If you publish a call for bids and only a handful of companies know about this, then you're limiting competition. You're shutting out potential competitors, and that tends to drive prices up. But over the years that this platform has been online, this data has been accessible, and it's become very incredibly useful for people trying to track public money. For example, journalists, researchers, and NGOs, they can look for themselves and they don't have to rely on reporting by the government. They can actually go to these platforms and look for themselves where the money is going. And they can ask the government about these. So we have information online about how governments spend their budget in actual data. This may lead to publications for scientists, media attention generated by journalists, and policy recommendations, which are backed by data by the NGOs. So it's an incredible resource, but as you already hinted, there may be some caveats, some problems in using these data. As I said, the clean data in a structured format is the ideal case. So I can make it more vivid for you in describing how I discovered this data. When I first found the TED database, it was just amazing. A huge data set, so many variables, all online, free, downloadable, massive, almost 12 million entries. For social scientists, that's a treasure chest just unknown before. But if you start digging into the details and try to analyze the data, really, you notice some cracks. First off, the first hit to my optimism, enthusiasm was TED only covers contracts above a certain threshold, and not low ones at that. It's 5.5 million for construction work, and about 140,000 to 400,000 for goods and services, depending on what is bought and who's buying. So not all contracts are getting published on TED. Some of these might be published on national platforms. Some of these contracts never get published at all. As a second point, the data isn't always clean. That's a big problem. We see missing supplier IDs, weird date formats, inconsistent categories, and sometimes even clearly incorrect numbers in fields like the paid and agreed price. And that is just the basic fields. If you try to compare tenders across countries, well, good luck. The descriptions are usually given in the national language of the buyer, which in the EU can be a lot of different languages. And also not all countries in the EU use the euro, so these contracts also might include local currency, which then needs to be translated into euro values to be compared across borders.
Yeah, I think 𝐮𝐿𝐽𝐜, well, this overview is quite helpful to shed some lights on the inner functioning of this platform that might be obscure to the majority of our. Maybe not of our community, since they're familiarized a lot in over the course of the project with this tool, but with some listener of the podcast as well. I was wondering before closing this point, if either, since I know mainly Peter is working alongside with you toward this analytical driven effort. Let's say if you want to complement with something, either you or Tim, on what 𝐮𝐿𝐽𝐜 has already illustrated.
No, I'm just amazed with how much enthusiasm you can talk about a big Excel sheet, but yeah.
Yes, 𝐮𝐿𝐽𝐜 has given a great overview over the data. They are actually unstructured, and at first they seem to be a treasure. At the second side, it's a big mess actually. But it's still valuable for us, because we can, if we invest into the data cleaning, there can be some results can be derived actually. Yes. Mm.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if 𝐮𝐿𝐽𝐜, do you want to have a closing line on this before turning to the actual measurement problem?
Yeah, sure. Just let me emphasize that we need some kind of standardization. What is CEDAR actually feeding into? We need standardization, some kind of cleaned data, perhaps better what we have today. But publishing the data isn't enough. We need also people who can work with the data, and preferably not having to dig through such a messy data as it currently is.
Okay, I think we are going to keep this a very valuable final takeaway for this point, 𝐮𝐿𝐽𝐜. And you did really well in coming up with the standardization effort that we need to carry out within the CEDAR overall scope as well. But we have actually been working in the last month of this, and we will be focusing on the standardization task much more in the second part of the project. I would like now to shift toward one of the core issue or the core point I've already anticipated a few seconds ago. I mean, the actual measurement, corruption measurement issue. And I'm looking at you now, Peter, and I'd like to ask you, why is corruption so difficult to be measured directly, especially if we compare corruption to other kind of let's say illicit activities, to other kind of crimes, and which kind of differences in a legal definition and reporting behavior and culture whatsoever affect the comparability of corruption data across countries? That's big. It's a big take, I know, but so floor is yours to better explore this. You can.
Thank you,
go,
Francesco. Yes. First of all, corruption is usually hidden. It happens out of sight. It happens behind closed door and often without any obvious trace. And as we have heard already by Tim and 𝐦𝐿𝐵𝐚𝐥, we have data and we have official statistics such as tender electronic daily. 𝐦𝐿𝐵𝐚𝐥 had introduced those, and we have also some evidence about the destructive impact of corruption. But those results, those empirical results, are usually coming from not direct measurements, but indirect measurements. So, and one point why it cannot be measured directly is that corruption is hidden. So, and we have heard already from the examples by 𝐦𝐿𝐵𝐚𝐥 about public procurement. On the theoretical and technical side, one point is that corruption is very difficult to define. Corruption is not just one thing, it's a whole range of behaviors. It encompasses bribery, embezzlement, nepotism, the abuse of power, and the variety makes it so hard to agree on what exactly should be measured. And take, for example, the very often used definition by Transparency International, the anti-corruption organization. They say corruption is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. And you see, this is a broad definition, and that broadness makes it difficult to turn into specific indicators we can count and use in empirical research. And another point is that corruption comes up with a lot of unseen cases, not recorded cases. Criminologists call this the dark figure of crime. The term refers to the gap between the actual number of crimes committed and the number that get officially recorded. So, and with corruption, this dark figure is especially large. And because cases are so rarely reported, we often have no idea how much corruption is really happening beneath the surface. It's like trying to estimate the size of an iceberg just by looking at its tip. So, and now, considering this, let's compare this crime with other crimes. Take burglary or car theft. There are usually victims of such crimes. Someone noticed the crime, calls the police, and a report is filed. That generates an official statistics. It creates a data trail we can use in, for instance, in the CEDAR project. But by contrast, corruption doesn't have a clear victim. The damage is real, as we have heard by Tim before. There are lost public funds, poor services, and broken trust, which is the most significant impact, negative impact on society. But corruption is invisible to most people, and sometimes it's also embedded in the political or administrative system that have their own mechanisms to keep corrupt transactions hidden. So, and therefore we have to rely on indirect methods, and those are usually called perception measures, or perception indices. And with these perception indices, we can actually compare countries or sometimes regions, mostly countries. So, and your question also dealt with the comparison of corruption across countries. And therefore, obviously, it's very difficult to compare the amount of corruption or the prevalence of corruption across countries. And the studies who did this, they found that there are major differences in the definition of corporate bribery and how it's punished. And they also found that there is a precise legal definition missing. Most of all, because we do not have a universal definition of corruption, we have to mix legal standards and informal social norms. And then also in the comparison kicks the impact of culture in. And culture shapes how corruption is understood and tolerated. And there's an outstanding study done by Fisman and Miguel, who ran a rather clever study. They looked at the parking violations by diplomats in New York City. Diplomats from high corruption countries broke the rules more, even though enforcement was the same for everyone. So according to the authors, norms, also corruption norms, travel with people even into neutral environments. And if we return to the official figures, such as introduced by Sönke, for instance, in the TED data, then there are really paradoxical cases. For instance, in the Scandinavian countries. So Sweden reports the highest number of corrupt cases per 100,000 people in the EU. That might sound surprising because Sweden is seen as one of the least corrupt countries. What is going on here? And it's not easy to understand and to explain what is going on. So people in Sweden report corruption more readily. That might be one reason. They trust institutions, they believe in accountability, and they have a very strong whistleblower law. So it's not that they have a high corruption per se. It's more they have a greater willingness to expose it. And Sweden also has a broad legal definition. We had talked about the broadness of definitions for the empirical research in corruption before. And therefore, some countries do not include aspects like bribery, embezzlement, abuse of power, or conflicts of interest into the definition. And therefore, Sweden does this. And because of this, they have a rather big legal net. And on the society side, there are big cultural differences to other countries in the EU, for instance, and also to other countries in the world. In Sweden, nepotism or favoritism is widely seen as corrupt. In other countries, they might be seen as normal or even expected. And therefore, such behavior go often unreported elsewhere. And summing up, Sweden's high numbers do not mean it's more corrupt. They mean they are better at catching and recording corruption. That's one takeaway message, that we have to look very carefully at our data, and there's a significant amount of literature in the empirical literature that has the take-home message: please do not misinterpret cross-country corruption data.
Great. Thank you very much, Peter. It was really insightful. I got among others, my lesson nerd of the day as well, with this concept of dark figures of crime that I was unaware of. It's really interesting. I will dig deeper on that myself as well. And before opening the floor to any further comment, maybe mainly to Tim about as well, but about the cultural differences and perception on corruption, that it's going to be slightly tackled at the end in the very last point of the of our meeting today. So I don't want to spoil that much, but if you want to beef up what Peter just said, please.
Now, if you think about what I said at the beginning of this podcast, on an individual level, corruption might be a rational thing to do, and that is why it is reported so rarely, because the person who bribes and the person who receives the bribes are, under normal circumstances, the only two people who know about the bribery, and none of them is a victim. The victims are everyone else, and unless they see something and they have the feeling that there was something fishy going on in this transaction, then they report it. But this is why we have so many unreported cases of corruption, because again, the victims are spread. Basically, victims are the entire society, and don't even know in a individual case that they became a victim of this act of corruption. And then, the cultural part, that's of course important when it comes to the reporting. If you come from a country where corruption is the norm, where everyone does it, why should I care that my neighbor, my friend, someone took a bribe or paid a bribe? Whereas when you come from a country where this is seen as unethical, immoral, then that's a different story. And you can go as far back and if once upon a time when you paid for your sins with your indulgence payment, that's kind of a bribe towards your God and your priest. There's a reason why the Protestants and Lutherans rebelled against that. And to a certain degree, you can still see that as part of the culture.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, Tim, as well. And I would like, again, to move on, but at the same time to keep pretty much on the same pattern, on riding on the same track. And I'd like to introduce the argument of the quantitative research on corruption, and just pretty related, I would say, also to the work that the Kiel University is carrying out within the CEDAR context. So again, I'm looking at mainly at you, Peter, and 𝐬𝐮𝐥𝐭𝐞𝐿 as well, of course, to complement. I would like to open up this question with asking you, why do researchers rely on the concept of CPI, Corruption Perception Index, instead of official figures? And which are its main limitations, according to you?
Yes, as we have heard before, corruption is very hard to measure directly. And Tim has said it before. Both sides, the giver and the taker, have no reason to report it. So official statistics only capture what gets caught. That's just the tip of the iceberg. And objective data on corruption is often unreliable because most of it stays invisible, as said Tim before also. And that are some reasons why researchers use perception-based indices. But there's a bit more to it. As I said before, legal definitions of corruption vary a lot across countries. Even countries that follow the same global conventions define and punish corruption very differently. This means official data is sometimes inconsistent, not only because the unstructured data structure in the TED data, for instance. Tim implied it before, one country might count a certain act as corruption, another might not. And if there's an official norm who forces you to follow the norm of corruption, then it would be not very rational to oblige to it. And then how can we compare countries in which official norm of corruption exists with a country and most countries in which such norms do not exist? So, and this is a place when the situation when perception indices comes in, because perception indices like the Corruption Perception Index offer a more uniform method and brings together expert opinions and survey data that makes comparisons possible and sometimes stable across different systems, such political systems, such different cultural systems. And those perception-based indices like the CPI, the Corruption Perception Index, they capture a broader picture about corruption. They include what business people, citizens, experts think about corruption. And that's very important. They also reflect how much people trust or don't trust public institutions. So, and because corruption isn't just about criminal acts, it's also about the erosion of trust. In the beginning of our talk, Tim talked about the dysfunctionality of a system. And the dysfunctionality of a system starts with the erosion of trust. And moreover, there's also a practical reason to take such perception-based indices, such as the CPI. A very practical reason, because objective data on corruption, to get such data is expensive and typically it's very slow. And imagine how to gather such data in a country which doesn't have a transparent government or a transparent administration. It's very, very difficult to get such data. And these are some of the reasons why researchers and policymakers keep on using perception indices. But obviously they have the flaws. And I would like to say a bit about how such a corruption indices, maybe the most important corruption index works. So that's this Corruption Perception Index by Transparency International. And it ranks countries by how corrupt the public sector is perceived to be. The scale runs from 0 to 100, and 0 means very corrupt and 100 means very clean. So it also ranks the countries in the list of sampled countries, and as such, it's a global benchmarking tool. With the CPI, we actually can compare countries according their perceived corruption. And it's a combination of surveys and assessments. And as I said before, it's not talking about corruption alone. It's also gathering information on democracy and on trust. And therefore, it's a policy tool that we can use. On the other hand, okay, obviously, it's based not on facts, it's based on perceptions. And that means it doesn't measure actual incidents of corruption. It reflects what people think is happening. And obviously, this thinking is shaped by the media, by recent scandals, or, as we said before, cultural attitudes. So, and there is a bulk of empirical research, methodological research on how this CPI works in practice when you put it into a research study. So I will just refer to some point of interest because they also refer to our CEDAR project. As we've seen in the 𝐦𝐮𝐥𝐭𝐢 presentation, that the TED data appear to be interesting at the beginning, and then it's becoming difficult when they are put into the practice. But this is a matter of data quality, and data quality also affects the CPI. And data quality is also very important for our project because the data we are dealing with procurement are affected by low data quality most often. And the CPI surveys, which are used to compile the CPI overall index, they vary with quality, and that affects the reliability of the final index. However, as found out, many people in their research, and we done some research on our own about that, the reliability of this index is rather good compared to other indices. However, as I've said before, because it's based on perceptions, it's also influenced by other things that emotions, ideology, media. So, and therefore, sometimes it might be overestimate corruption, sometimes it might underestimate it. And it seems to provide an overall picture of corruption, but that's not the case. There are some studies which have shown that the CPI focuses too much on bribery and misses other forms of corruption like nepotism or favoritism. Okay, it does not cover every type of corruption, that's clear. It focuses on public sector and on private sector. So we get, again, only a part of the picture, and the sources are limited, but at least it's a rather useful tool for us if we want to have a benchmark of corruption. Yes.
Thank you very much, Peter. Would any of you like to add a short commentary on the very meticulous, on top of the very meticulous analysis from Peter, Tim, or 𝐮𝐿𝐼?
Well, just because Peter has mentioned the importance of trust several times, let me add to this. When I said in the beginning that transaction costs sometimes on an individual basis can be lowered by a bribe, trust in general has the same effect. If you trust in a process, if you trust in a person, you don't have to control, you don't have to spend money and resources on checking whether the process is all right, but you just trust it. And therefore, trust is sort of the grease in our culture and in our government system. And once this is lost, once you stop trusting into the system, then you increase transaction costs dramatically, because every side now of the transaction has to spend resources on lawyers, the judicial system, compliance officers, whatever, making sure that rules are being followed. If you just trust them to be followed and have no reason not to trust it, then you don't have to spend these resources and can put them to better uses.
Okay, great, guys. I mean, I think the conversation went really smooth and very informative and fun as well. I have to say, we have originally, and still we have planned the very last snippet of our discussion on the cultural side, on the cultural perception of the concept of corruption that has been slightly, let's say, tackled in, of course, in some of our conversation around this hour or nearly an hour we spent together. But I'd like to move back fast to this point, looking primarily at Tim. You have to, for the benefit of our listener, I'm sure that most of you are aware of the fact that CEDAR, the cultural perception of corruption, is very pivotal within the CEDAR project, since we have the baseline of the project centered around 3 different pilot cases that takes place in 3 different European European countries, more or less, let's say, to different extent, tackling the public management of funding within public administration in different domains. But I mean, let me cut to the chase and go to the question for Tim. I mean, how do political history and institutional strength might shape public attitudes toward corruption in different countries? And how can we learn from comparing these different contexts, let's say? So the floor is yours, Tim.
Well, we can either write a book about it or try to keep it brief. But look, every country brings its own unique history, the culture of its people, as I mentioned earlier, the religious background to the table, and all these things matter. And therefore, it makes sense that we, in our project, like with many other European projects as well, you do not only have one case study with one country, but you look at a diverse group of countries. In our case, as you mentioned, Italy, Slovenia, and Ukraine. Now, when it comes to corruption and transparency, these three countries are very different. Two of them have a communist background, even though one Soviet, the other more Yugoslavian background. Francesco, it feels kind of weird to talk about Italy and corruption to you, because what do I as a German know about it? But yeah, Italy has a long history of corruption, at least since World War II in the First Republic, and had a vast portfolio of scandals where political parties and organized crimes have been interlinked, and ultimately anti-corruption laws were enforced, but to this day the trust in the government, in the functioning of the state in Italy, is still, compared to other Western European countries, relatively low, even though a lot is being done in Italy to fight corruption, which only shows that what we've discussed earlier, that trust can be lost really quickly, but rebuilds over a long period of time. In Slovenia, different story, different history. After the collapse of Yugoslavia and becoming independent in 1991, you had a positively said, a very dynamic phase in the development, but that was also misused in some cases. And a Commission for the Prevention of Corruption, KPK, was established in order to fight that. But also in Slovenia, the trust in the government and in the functioning of the state is lower than what it is in Western Europe. And the Transparency International Index, as well as other indices, show that. Ultimately, Ukraine is a different and fascinating example, coming from a period, in a communist state. It was a norm that you do me a favor and I do you a favor, and the favor can be monetary or cigarettes against wine or in other currencies. But then after Ukraine became Ukraine again, and the collapse of the Soviet Empire, there were huge problems with corruption that ultimately, this was not the only reason, but led to the Maidan demonstrations. And here you can see, when I said earlier that trust takes a long time to build, but in a historic situation where the country fights for its independence, this process can also be sped up. That while before the start of the war, corruption was a big issue, it probably still is, but the acceptance within the society that corruption is taking place has changed dramatically. And that is why the country is doing a lot to fight corruption in this existential situation. And we see a lot of change there, which makes it so fascinating to doing research about it.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Tim. I mean, it's this walk through these 3 different countries that make the backbone of the project, but it's a very illuminating example to understand how cultural differences might play a very relevant role in shaping the perception of corruption. Since we are moving toward the end of the episode, I would also like to give the opportunity to either to Sönke or to Peter or both to have if you have any final remark of what Tim has just said, or to anything else before I'm going to shortly wrap up everything.
I agree with Tim. Institutions matter. And therefore, it's very important that they are not weak, that they become strong. And they are the most important fuel of such institution is trust. Trust coming from the citizens to the administrative and governance institutions. And I hope that our project will contribute to build this trust by providing some transparent tools for procurement.
Amen to that.
Yeah, I back this up as well. Sönke, you have any final thought you share with us?
Yes, Tim mentioned how different backgrounds of countries shape the realities we see today. And from my perspective, it's on the one hand very difficult to make comparisons with all this background in mind, but also very fascinating how many factors influence the reality today. And it makes it really rewarding when you come to a conclusion that takes all these factors into account. And I hope as well that we can provide some tools based on the CEDAR results that make such comparisons easier.
Thank you very much, Sönke, and thanks all, guys. Really, I mean, this hour ran really fast. Well, I think it was really interesting for all of us and all of our community of listeners. I think it's time to close down and wrap up right now. I'd like to, first of all, again, to sincerely thank you for having joined us for this second episode, and
thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Thank
very,
you.
very welcome for all the very insightful point you brought to the table and the discussion today. And I mean, I'm talking mainly at our community right now of followers, or I mean listener, or whichever you like to be regarded. Let's say, no, seriously, we will be in touch, of course, through our channels and across the next week, and surely during the summertime we will have, as promised, more episode in the pipeline, tackling more and more subject of revolving around the CEDAR sphere on corruption, but not only. So again, thank you all for being here. Let's keep in touch and follow us on our main digital channels on our website. So let's stay tuned to us to keep abreast with all of our novelties in a coming future. And so take care and have you all a fantastic job. Fantastic day. Thanks, guys, again.
Thanks.
Thank you, Francesco.
Thank you.
CEDAR Podcast.